Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of The Hussar's Duty by Griffin Brady, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Chapter 1, Looming Shadows. Lord Commander Jacek Dąbrowski was not a patient man under the best of circumstances. The current circumstances were draining his limited reserves faster than a soldier could drain his vodka ration. What do you mean you only have 12? The agreement was for 18. Where are the other 6? He barked at the stooped man before him, who, despite his considerable girth, seemed to shiver uncontrollably. Jacek had dismounted, yet still towered over the proprietor, a full head taller than most men of his acquaintance, with a look that called up the fearsome and cursed Vikings of old. Jacek was used to intimidating folk, and he availed himself of his size whenever it suited him, especially when he was vexed. Right now, he was spectacularly vexed. He had a higher power to answer to, and her name was Oliwia. She had sent him to collect 18 war horses, and his mind was already whirring through the various scenarios where he would present the shortage to her without incurring her disappointment. The outlook was grim. Her anger he could withstand. In fact, he would welcome it. But disappoint her? He would rather charge into a line of pikemen. His eyes swept once more over the man's orderly outbuildings and came to rest on the corrals, as if his will alone could conjure the beast he sought. Alas, it merely confirmed the breeder was telling the truth. Nevertheless, he jerked his head toward his best friend and second, Captain Henryk Kalinowski, who sat astride his mount. Take one of the men at arms and search the stables, the sheds, anywhere a grown horse could be hidden away. At least Jacek could tell his wife that they had searched dutifully for her stock. Henrik nodded his understanding and beckoned a guard from their party to follow him, and the two set off. Jacek's peach fuzz-faced brother-in-law, Philip Armstrong, fell in behind them. Jacek's irritation mushroomed. Philip with me. Philip paused long enough to stare down at Jacek from his saddle. The countenance beneath Philip's fur-cuffed colpack might have been proof of his youth, yet he possessed a full-grown hussar swagger, one he had yet to earn. At 16, Philip was mostly lean limbs, with hair the color of walnuts and eyes of storm cloud gray. Currently, a tempest was brewing in those storm clouds, which were pinned on Jacek. What emotions looked there? Scorn, defiance, anger? Likely all three. Jacek returned the glare with a glower of his own. Handling the lad was becoming more challenging with each passing hour, yet Jacek could remember himself at the same age, even though his years had since doubled. He understood. Philip was straining to break the bonds of childhood and declare himself a man, but Jacek would not allow this pup to buck his authority. There was an order to be followed, and Jacek had a duty to see that it was obeyed. The breeder interrupted their silent impasse, his eyes bouncing between Jacek and Philip. Begging your pardon, my lord. Your men are welcome to look all they please, but your horses were appropriated along with my other stock 3 days ago by the Grand Hetman of the Crown. The man offered a hand, palm up. As God is my witness, I wish I had more to offer you. Jacek refrained from gaping. Zolowski took them? The breeder nodded. The man himself. He needed them for his troops. There was trouble at the border with the Ottomans. There was always trouble at the border with the Ottomans, Jacek grumbled, and their damned minions, the Tartars. The Tatars. It may help you to know he paid for them in full, so you only owe for the 3, and he left behind one of my most exceptional mares, a sable with exquisite lines. The breeder's tentative smile did little to assuage Jacek's exasperation. Henrik and the other soldier trotted from between 2 outbuildings. Henrik shook his head. Jacek rolled his eyes to the expanse above and released a protracted exhale. The vault overhead was the color of a blue-throat's feathers and unmarred by a single cloud. A docile breeze ruffled newly sprung crocuses clumped by the farmhouse's dooryard. A perfect spring day in Halsek, under different circumstances. The sun was high and hot for mid-March, melting the vestiges of winter into a muddy mess, which only added to Jacek's foul mood. Negotiating the boggy roads with their caravan of wagons, 8 men, and extra horses made the going slow, and he was anxious to return to Biaska Castle in his own soft bed. Jacek dropped his gaze to the quaking breeder. My men will fetch the horses while you and I conclude our dealings. He flicked his gloved hand. Lead on. Bowing and scraping and scurrying, the breeder led him across the dooryard toward the farmhouse. Had Jacek been in a better temper, he would have found the sight amusing. Jacek lifted his chin to Philip. Fetch the coin from Marson to pay the man. Philip's eyes widened. Why me? Hussars do not handle money. That is for merchants, retainers, and townsfolk. The riffraff. He spat the last word with added disdain. Jacek gritted his teeth to keep from expressing his urge to throttle the youth. Let me remind you that you have yet to rise from retainer to hussar. Besides, you must understand how to deal with matters of commerce. There is more to being a knight than sword play. Philip looked around at the other men, a hopeful expression on his face. If he was expecting one to come to his defense, their smirks were sure to disappoint. They were likely as weary as Jacek of the boy's superior attitude. Jacek had been balancing on a drainpipe, trying not to single out his wife's brother for favorable treatment, while ever aware she might object. If Oliwia had her way, Philip would remain out of harm's way for the rest of his life. Unrealistic, especially for a lad who had dreamed of nothing but being a warrior since age 6. That would-be warrior dismounted with an irritated huff. Lord, give me the tolerance I need to preserve his scrawny neck. Hours later, the tension had been drowned in several jugs of pivo and vodka. Henrik signaled to a harried tavern maid for more, thanking her with a wink when she acknowledged the request. The men might have rejoiced in completing the mission successfully, but Jacek was left to ponder the measure of that success. He had been excited for the assignment at the outset, for it had given him a purpose, a reason to lead men once more. The undertaking, however, had proved a failure. And while he feigned celebration with his companions, relief that they were done and headed home at dawn was the emotion that prevailed. They had been gone 3 long weeks, and he'd missed his wife and children. How much had the baby grown during his time away? Would he find Oliwia with child again when he returned? The possibility caused unexpected warmth to bloom in his chest. He took pride in the fact that he was a father 3 times over. His wife had blessed him with a daughter and a son of his own, and he had adopted Olivia's 6-year-old boy by her late husband. The love Jacek felt for the lad was as strong as what he felt for his own offspring. Adam only knew one potter, and that would be Jacek. If he pushed and the weather and mud relented, in 2 weeks' time they would be passed into the Jura Highlands of Lesser Poland, where Biaska lay among the sprawling Eagle's Nest fortifications. He resolved to shove if he had to. Clustered about a rectangular table in the corner of the bustling tavern, the men exchanged stories that grew bawdier with each pitcher of drink consumed. Jacek observed with muted amusement and made sure his men didn't wind up brawling. Their attention soon turned to the tavern maids, and bravado spurred them to placing bets on which ones would be willing to do what with whom. Philip was eager to jump into the fray, though his inexperience showed each time a maid looked his way and a red blaze ignited his cheeks. Giving him no quarter, the men mocked him mercilessly, which only caused the lad to fluster hotter. Henrik leaned into Jacek's ear. Philip's been asking me to take him to one of the stews. Jacek masked his surprise and let his tongue wag with imprudence. He'd be better off with one of the tavern maids. A few appear willing enough. Like that one over there who favors you. Henrik dipped his head toward a maid who had bestowed Jacek with several blinding smiles since their arrival. I dare say she's more than willing to let you take her for a tumble. He paused to scratch his chin. Why do maids always favor the monks? It's the challenge, I suppose. He tossed back the remaining vodka in his cup. Seated beside Jacek, Marcin, his Palachuk, His retainer scoffed and quickly averted his eyes when Jacek slid him a sidelong glance. A minor lord and Hussar himself now. Marson had served Jacek longer than either man could remember, which was probably why Marson dared to show his impertinence. Ignoring the postulant, Jacek turned to Henrik. Are you calling me a monk? When you're on the road, most definitely. Because I take my marriage vows seriously? So do other men when they're in their own homes and not trekking about the countryside. Henrik tapped his chin. Of course, that also explains why you've been so mordant of late. Jacek's unwillingness to betray his wife's trust went far beyond staking himself to his vows. Truth was, in the 5 years that they had been wed, and earlier besides, he found no other woman as alluring as she. Yes, many were nice to look at, but beyond that, his interest was not flagged. It buried itself in the dirt. Oliwia had always stirred wants and needs in him he could not understand, and had given up trying. In short, she was the only one for him, and ever would be. I am neither mordant nor monkish. Now about Philip. He says a whore will teach him what to do in a maid's bed, Henrik shrugged. There's a certain logic in that, yes? Did you also explain that a whore's also more likely to give him the pox? Jacek said dryly. And why didn't he come to me with this request? Marson snorted in his cup this time, and Henrik guffawed. A moment later, Henrik caught his breath. That would be akin to asking a blind man the color of a piece of cloth. Besides, he probably doesn't wish to hear your sermon on the sins of the flesh. Henrik's voice took on gravity with the last words, and he spread his hands and looked to the ceiling as though he were praying over a congregation. Jacek had no such sermon, and he opened his mouth to deliver the rejoinder scrabbling up his throat. It died there when a familiar name pricked his ears. Zolowiski. He swiveled his head in unison with Marson, searching for the voice's source. Seated at a nearby table was another group of men, locals by the look of them, and they were buzzing with animated conversation. When Jacek picked up the word Pasha, he swiped a jug from his own men, ignored their protests as he sauntered to the other table, and placed the vessel square in the center. If you have news of the trouble at the border, I would like to hear it. One man, a stocky fellow with an impressive brown mustache streaked with gray, glanced up at him. Dressed in the finer attire of a merchant, he looked Jacek in the eyes. He took Jacek in with eyes like polished pebbles, and then broke out in a grin. If you're offering your drink, I would like to tell it. Sit, my friend.